Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the first chapter in Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians. In the material we already covered, we learned some of the blessings and the gifts of this church, but we also learn of its problems. In the passage we're going to cover, it's more doctrinal than practical. But let's review what we already covered. He gives an expression after the customary introductory greeting, which is typical to most of Paul's epistles. He said he thanks Elohim, always concerning you, for the grace of Elohim which was given to you by Messiah Yahshua, that in him you were enriched in all, in every word and knowledge. So the Corinthian assembly were a spiritually gifted people. They had all the resources, all the gifts. The problem was they lacked the resourcefulness. They were not team players. The spirit of the world and selfishness caused them to abuse, misuse, misrepresent, and exploit all these wonderful gifts that they had been given, so that you are not lacking in any gift, eagerly awaiting for the revelation of our Master, Yahshua Messiah. So these gifts were necessary to prepare them for the second coming. That is the humblest hope and most exalted expectation of Christians of all the ages, and much of the fire has sort of diminished. It's come and gone, but it's mostly gone now. There are a few people who think that we are coming to the end of the time. It has been known. I am one of them. I know we are discouraged from speculating as to the end of the end times, but I think this world as we know it really only has another 150 years to last tops, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that they had they had the resources, they had the gifts, they just didn't have the spirit to utilize that gifts in the collective. Verse 10, and I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Master, Yahshua Messiah, so that you all agree, and that there be no division among you, but that you be knit together in the same mind and the same opinion. This plea for unity is a pure petition for any church. There should be disharmony and disagreement and quarrel and contention and debate and strife should be repulsive in any of our assemblies. Tragically, this was the case of the Corinthians, because they had formed factionalisms and just they put principles above personality. So they were not united in mind, they were not united in agenda, they were not united in purpose. They were in fact divided against each other. They were not knit together in the same mind and in the same opinion. And this information was relayed to him by a woman named Chloe, a woman whose name only appears in this one instance in the New Testament, but she was his conduit. And he asked a question. He names the four factions. There was the faction of Paul. He was the one who had personally evangelized the city in the 18th chapter of Acts. And Apollos was an eloquent preacher who was learned in the Jews. Incidentally, Paul kind of diminishes the significance of eloquent preaching in the passage we're going to cover today. But the Apollo was a man mighty in preaching, and he had a limited knowledge, but a husband and wife team who were tent makers and Paul had been acquainted, had taken him aside because his knowledge was incomplete. He knew the good news only up to the point of John the Baptist. Peter would have been recognized as the apostle of the circumcised, the Jews. Paul would have been the apostle of the uncircumcised in that division of labor. And the ones who were of the Messiah were just the holier-than-thou types who bowed and submitted to no human leader. But Paul asked the question which squashes the legitimacy of this factionalism. Has Messiah been divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? So the aim and end of any church, the only personality, the only one who reigns, the only one who rules, is the namesake, Yahshua Messiah, and he is indivisible. He exists in perfect harmony as a relational being with the Father and the Spirit, and he was crucified for our sake, so no human leader was, and we are not baptized in the name of the one who baptizes us, but in his name, out of his example. And Paul sort of diminishes now baptism is necessary, but Paul does much the same thing with the gift of tongues in the 12th chapter of this book. He says, I can speak more tongues than anyone in here. Nevertheless, I account it for naught. And he says much the same, I think, baptism. He's saying he may have baptized 1 or 2 or 3 people, but he cannot remember. But verse 17, for Messiah did not send me to baptize, but to bring the good news, not with wisdom of words, that the cross of Messiah should be nullified. His commission and his mission and his heaven-sent agenda was not to baptize but to preach, and preaching is logically prior to baptism. Baptism is an act of faith, a public demonstration of faith, but faith cometh by hearing, and hearing from the word of God, Romans 10:14. So preaching is, without preaching there can be no baptism, and baptism is necessary, but preaching is absolutely essential, and he was told not only what to preach or that to preach, but how to preach, not with wisdom of words, but with simplicity of speech, not the elegant sophistry of the trained orator, but a simple message. It wasn't about the messenger, it was about the message itself. The message of the cross of the Messiah was paramount and to be preserved and was not to be nullified. Paul was certainly capable of polished orator and splendid preaching, but he was obedient. He said what he was told to say. He went where he was told to go, and a few times the Spirit does intervene with directions he wants to know, and he spoke what he was spoken to do. Verse 18, lesson itself, for the word of the cross is indeed foolish to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of Elohim. There are 2 types of people, and from their 2 outlooks spring 2 opposite outcomes. Those who are perishing, those who are living in their sin, loving in it, and they're going to die in their sin unrepentant. They resist the call of repentance at the cross, and they are offended by it, and we read more of the offensive nature in subsequent verses. But it is also diminished as foolishness. It seems foolishness to people who are sinful that someone would die for their sin, because they don't even have the same attitude, mindset, or mentality of sin. But to us who are being saved, those who know the truth and are being saved by the truth and will land in heaven because of our knowledge of the truth, it is the power of Elohim. So in this crude instrument, which is shunned by the world because the world interprets it in the lens of weakness, but the paradox of Elohim is that his weakness is made manifest in strength. Paul comments on this not only here, but in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10. For it has been written, I shall destroy the wisdom of the wise and put aside the learning of the learned ones. This is a citation of Isaiah 29:14, and the so-called wise that the prophet was chiding in his days were the pro-Egyptian party, because the nation of Judah was in the midst of a balance of power struggle, according to which Assyria was supreme. They had just swallowed whole the northern covenant nation of Israel, and they were threatening it. So the wise men, the councils who had gathered around the king, advised him to put their faith in the Egyptian alliance, because they too were threatened by the Assyrians, and it makes sense strategically and diplomatically, but theologically, covenantally, and morally it was wrong. The prophet's message was to put their faith was misplaced in pagan powers. They should be looking to the power above. Now, in the present context that Paul is writing, the words of Isaiah ring true, because Greeks, the land of Greece, Corinth was a city, the cultural capital of the modern country of Greece. They were prided for their wisdom, and we still read them and revere them as pillars of wisdom. But their wisdom is as naught compared to the foolishness of the cross, and all the wisdom in all the world of men. Worldly wisdom, carnal wisdom is foolishness, and Elohim's foolishness is wiser than it, we eventually read. Where is the wise? Where is the scholar? Where is the debater of this age? Hath not Elohim made foolish the wisdom of this world? There's 4 questions, the first of which, where is the wise, where is the scholar, where is the debater of these age? These are just synonymous terms with people who are pillars of intellectual advancement. They're the intellectual elite, the men of wisdom, the scholars, the university professors, the orators, the debaters, the ones who make cases in public, just the attorneys who make the some of the arguments that affect not only today but history. So these categories of people, and he asked the rhetorical question, hath not Elohim made foolishness the wisdom of the world? And look at the wisdom of the world in any age. Basically, the best brains and top scientists in the country right now are trying to build bombs that are more explosive, missiles that are more accurate, weapons of mass destruction. And this is where our best brains are being employed. Our most brilliant minds are being utilized for destructive purposes. And the wisdom of the world, there is no wisdom in the world. And the state and condition of the world in any age, it is completely subsumed in wickedness in any age. The world is a dark and evil place, and there are wise humans, but collectively the human race is unwise. There is inequality, oppression, and just starvation, and just the treating of our fellow man, the ones who are made in the same image of Elohim, as enemies, is anathema to the created purpose. So we are not wisdom of the world. There's no such thing. There are people who are wise in the ways of the world. There is such thing as worldly wisdom. There is such thing as carnal wisdom, but there is no such thing as the wisdom of the world, because look at its sad, dejected, deteriorated, degenerate state, not only now, but at all times and in all places. For since in the wisdom of Elohim, the world through wisdom did not know Elohim, it pleased Elohim through the foolishness of preaching to save those who believe. Now, there is a slogan that you cannot be too dumb to believe in a deity, but you can be too intelligent. And 2 Corinthians 2:4, the God of this world, Satan, has blinded the men, some of the most brilliant people in the world. They can master any subject, but you talk to them about the simple truth of God and they just can't see it. They just can't get it, because human wisdom, apart from Elohim, is incompetent to discover or approach or even access Elohim. And this much is made plain in the 2nd chapter of this book. The things of the Spirit are known of the Spirit. So I'm not saying that there's no such thing as wisdom apart from divinity. I'm just saying that the knowledge of divinity cannot exist apart from the impartation of that knowledge from an external source. Revelation is the epistemologically valid form of knowledge of divinity. But you can know him. So since the wise cannot see him, he's still going to make himself known. He's going to go to the babes, the uneducated, the uncultured, the outcasts, the ridiculed, the ones who are not privileged, the ones who are not cultured. He's going to make himself known to them, and the foolish will rise and shame the wise, because they will have made the wise will end up in an eternal torment, whereas the foolish will end up in eternal bliss. So who's wise and who's foolish? It's a complete paradox upside down. And the foolishness of preaching. Now, the content of Paul's preaching certainly wasn't foolish. It only seemed foolish. It may have sounded foolish, but it had the power and the ability to save those who believe. It was not Paul's power, but the Spirit speaking in him and through him. And so Paul may have seemed foolish, but he was unlocking and unleashing the power of salvation that is utilized and accessed through faith. Faith is the avenue which unlocks the salvation, and the foolish, you will see the wisdom in the seemingly foolish sounding preaching. And since the Jews ask a sign and the Greeks seek wisdom, the Jews would have been had a proud heritage and history of miracles, ever since, especially the book of Exodus, but not only then, but certainly ever since. Even today, the miracle, the military triumph of Israel over combined forces exceedingly superior in number than them. That is a miracle. They are being protected and watching. So Israel is a nation of miracles, and they needed a sign because so spoiled and accustomed were they to them that they needed a sign to stimulate their faith. But signs are unnecessary when you have the witness of the miracles of Moses and everyone else. Then it is an act of faithlessness, and the Savior condemns the wicked and spiritually adulterous generation that seeketh after a sign, when they asked for confirmation of his identity and told him there will be no sign but the sign of Jonah. We can read that in Luke 11, Matthew 12, and 16. And the Greeks seek wisdom. They had a rich culture and tradition of wisdom. They invented the science of philosophy, the discipline thereof, even though Solomon certainly preempts. We don't have time to discuss the depths and dimension, but we have discussed it in Ecclesiastes 1. You can type in that. But wisdom, they had schools of philosophy. They were all over the place. The entire range of the intellectual spectrum was represented. The Greeks were a smart people, wise people, even before the knowledge. And this proves the point that wisdom is possible apart from a knowledge of divinity. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Messiah, the power of Elohim, and the wisdom of Elohim. Both those who are called Jews and Greeks, salvation cometh from the Jews, John 4:22, and the good news comes to the Jew first and then to the Gentile, Romans 1:16. But it is a message for all. Jews, Greek is roughly interchangeable with Gentiles, but the power of Elohim is revealed. Actually, I skipped a verse. Yet we proclaim Messiah crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. So the Jews saw the cross as a sign of weakness. It did not fit their preconceived conception and expectation of the Messiah, so they stumbled over it. It is an offense and it is a stumbling block. And the Greeks, who could boast in their heritage and wellspring of wisdom, regarded it as foolish. First off, the resurrection was not only unfathomable but undesirable to the Greeks. They regarded the body as a prison, and the blissful afterlife could not exist within a body, so they didn't want the resurrection to be true. But in that is the power of Elohim and the wisdom of Elohim. This combines his dual attributes of omnipotence, which is infinite or unlimited strength, and omniscience, infinite or unlimited wisdom. There is no greater nor grander miracle than the salvation of a sinner in all the universe. For the foolishness of Elohim is wiser than men, and the weakness of Elohim is stronger than men. Now this ought not be interpreted to suggest that there is any element of foolishness in Elohim or in any weakness in him. He is a perfect creature. As an omniscient being, that means it is impossible to have any species or element or ingredient of foolishness in his mind or his being. But it is only to say that if he had, on his most foolish day, if he was literally capable of being foolish, he would still be wiser than all the men in all the ages combined. And weakness, once more, he is an omnipotent being in addition to being an omniscient one. So there is no weakness in him. And sometimes people think his power is diminished, but just because he's not acting directly on their behest does not mean that he is not able to save. It just means that it is not his will to intervene. So that is a test of faith when you have a loved one who is sick and death is taking its devastating deterior effects and you don't see any healing. It is not because Yahweh is powerless to heal. It just might be his will that nature take their course on them. For look at your calling, brothers, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. So the Corinthian assembly and the assembly at large is almost exclusively, the majority is certainly comprised of ordinary, obscure, and virtually anonymous nobodies, the ones who are written off in the world, the ones who are on the bottom rung of society, the scum of the socioeconomic order, not many educated people, but, he chose the foolishness of the world to shame and proclaim and establish the dominance of his own wisdom over the wisdom of the so-called wise. He chose the uneducated, unschooled, and unlettered people, and the purpose is revealed in the next verse. And he didn't call many powerful wise according to the flesh. That's the species of carnal or worldly wisdom, the ways of the world, the operations of the world, worldly wisdom, how to make influence and make friends, essentially, is the wisdom of the world. But those are the ones who he did not call and he did not choose. So the fact that we belong to him is a product of his sovereign selection. We did not choose him. We chose him, but not before he chose us. We still have the responsibility and agency to respond to the calling, but weak of the world, this is not the physically weak. These are just the poor, the powerless, the destitute, those who are weak, and to put to shame the strong, the ones who are on the top of the food chain, the top of the socioeconomic pecking order. The powers which oppress and persecute them will be ashamed for having done so and will be exposed fully and finally as foolish for having messed with them. But Elohim has verse 28, and Elohim has chosen the lowborn of the world and the despised and the ones that are not, that he might bring to naught the ones that are. So the perfect balance and justice of his paradox consists of him using the people of obscure birth, the commoners, the ones who are written off the bottom, the ones who gravitated at the bottom ladder of society, bottom rung of the ladder, those who are despised. Now our Messiah was despised and ridiculed and rejected of men. We read of in Isaiah 53:3. And so we who call ourselves his disciples have no right or reasonable expectation not to be despised by the world. If you're going to be a Christian, the world will not going to like you. If you want the friendship of the world, throw in the towel. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. Stick with it. It does get better. But we have to be prepared and willing to endure the hatred and the hostility of the world we are trying to save. That is one of the most challenging parts of being a Christian. And the ones that are not, the ones, no reputation, no one, no standing or influence or respect or standing in the community, but they are highly esteemed in heaven, even though they are despised on earth. And it's all to bring to naught the ones that are. So in the heavenly just judgments, losers will become winners and winners will become losers. So that no flesh should boast in his presence. No flesh means no person. We are creatures of flesh, physical forms in our life, and we have no cause or reason or right to boast or brag in his presence. His is capitalized. That means the one who chose us when we were nothing. We knew we were nothing. We knew we came from nothing, and then we were chosen to a great thing, and we have no cause or right or righteous desire to even boast in his presence. All the praise, honor, adulation, and esteem belongs to him who rose us from our degraded station to an exaltation we did not deserve or merit. All honor, esteem, pleasure, and praise, and everything else belongs to him and not to us. And of him you are in Messiah Yahshua, who became for us wisdom from Elohim, righteousness also, and sacredness and redemption. So we learn that four things these are attributes of Messiah. An attribute is distinct from a characteristic. Characteristic is applied to humans. If I say this person's a kind person, if I say, but to Elohim, that is an attribute, because kindness and love and goodness and everything else emanates to him. It can be attributed to him, those very qualities. And what is true for Elohim, Messiah is Elohim, Messiah Yahshua, and he became for us wisdom. He is omniscient, that is the attribute of unlimited or infinite, and his wisdom is expressed in the crude instrument of the cross, which accomplished something beyond the wisdom of the world's ability to even intuit or even imagine. He is wiser than the fools, and the wisdom from Elohim. In righteousness, he was sinless. He was the only one who was born without sin, who lived without sin, and died without sin. And we have to be clothed in his righteousness if we plan to make it to heaven. So some of you right now may be filled with sin and guilt, and you're going to need a new set of clothes, and you have to be clothed in his righteousness in order to make it to heaven. And his righteousness is imputed to us on our account. So when you are, if I don't know what's going to happen when we are judged, but in the off chance that Yahweh asks us the question, why should I let you in? You cannot claim anything you did. You have to rest your case on what the Son did for you. And sacredness, now we are commanded to be sacred because he is sacred in Leviticus 19:2 and 44, and also 1 Peter 1:16. The sacredness is the quality. Now none of us are sacred. That is just his complete separateness from sin and imperfection. And redemption, he is our ransom and our redemption. We often refer to the plan of creation and redemption. So creation was created good, then sin created a cosmic disequilibrium. So the entire universe groans for redemption. Nature itself longs for the release of the bondage of the imperfection that was precipitated by Adam and Lucifer's fall. But he did accomplish our redemption. He was uniquely qualified to do so. That as it been written, he who boasts, let him boast in Yahweh. So once more, this is a citation of Jeremiah 9:23. And much as earlier we are said, lest no flesh should boast, we should not boast in ourselves, because look at who we were before we were called to be Christians. We were at the scum of the earth, lowest rung of society. At least I was. I don't know your life story, but if you were, consider yourself grateful and fortunate to be where you are now, with the standing in heaven. And maybe the whole world's not going to like you, but that ultimately doesn't matter. And we shouldn't boast in ourselves, but let us boast in Yahweh, who chose us, who redeems us, who saves us, who loves us, who does everything for us that we cannot hope to do for ourselves, but we should try to do what he does for us to others in proportion to our finite capacities. But all the boasting, all the glory, all the praise, all the honor attributes to him, because our wisdom compared to his wisdom is non-existent. Our strength compared to his strength is just infinitesimal. So he is able to do everything for ourselves that no one else can. He is unique, and there's literally no one like him in the universe, and he has our eternal gratitude and praise. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.